And I'm quite excited because not only will we have some inputs to get us going, a little bit of thinking from Malin Alborg, Marshall Brown, and I, but I think the real juicy part of the session will be hearing from 3 countries that are really diving into this issue of how to deal with Article 6 strategies. And we'll hear both from some of the representatives in government leading these efforts and also people outside of government who are supporting them. So I think this will be a very nice balance, and we'll provide, most of our time will be for these panel discussions, and we'll also have some time for questions. Just some housekeeping. We'll ask when the speakers are speaking, we'll ask them obviously to have their cameras on. In terms of questions, we have allocated some time for this at the end. If you want to put a question in the meanwhile in the chat, my colleague Laura will be going through some of those, and we'll probably try to manage it that way by collecting some questions from the chat at the end, depending on the time we have. But yeah, other than that, we look forward to it, and a big thanks to GGGI for co-hosting this and putting on the entire event, and for all of our speakers for being here. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my slides and ask for Malin Alborg to share some opening remarks. I mean, Malin, I think, is probably one of the people who is most knowledgeable in the sense that there's so much good work the German government is doing now on Article 6 that I think she has a wonderful overview. And her particular role is Deputy Head for International Financing of the Transformation and International Market Mechanisms at the German Federal Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate Action. She's also the key person for an effort that GGGI and Carbon Limits are involved with to build capacity for Article 6. And as I say, I think it has a really, really good overview of what's happening in this field. So I'll turn it over to Malin.
Thank you very much, Randall, and thank you very much for inviting me to this session today. I think the title, Developing an Article 6 Host Country Strategy, sounds very promising to me. So I would like to start my opening remarks with a question, how to do that? So yes, and I'm also sure that we will hear more about that then in the second part of the session when we're listening to the host country perspective. So with the Glasgow decision, we have provision are now available for all 3 types of international cooperation of Article 6. And the task is now to implement the new rules without compromising the integrity. And therefore, of course, there are still technical issues that have to be worked on the UN level. But of course, there is also comprehensive capacity building for implementing countries is needed. So as we learned in several of yesterday's sessions here at the GGG week, there is a clear demand for carbon credits from both private and governments. So developing countries and emerging economies stand to gain substantially from the promise of inbound low carbon investment and sustainable development co-benefits that can unlock by carbon finance and carbon trading. So at the same time, most countries are just beginning to understand the depth and the scope of efforts required to make ITMO transaction work. So this can include activities such as improved medium and long-term emission planning, design of potential mitigation activities that can lead to ITMO transactions, and establishment of government framework for authorization and managing the transaction. So from the perspective of German government, the use of Article 6 starts with a good contribution to capacity building. And there seems to be a broad consensus that strengthening support for capacity building in the implementing countries with respect to the robust implementation of Article 6 is high on the international political agenda. So for this reason, we have funded a 5 years, 20 million euro program supporting preparedness for Article 6 cooperation. The short version is SPARC. To support our partners in Colombia, Pakistan, and Thailand and Zambia. So our intention is that we would like to that these countries develop their own strategy, how they want to use Article 6 to further enhance and to implement their NDC. So it's not so that they become a more active player in the carbon market rather than that any buyer come into the countries and say, we look here, we have this kind of project and please issue some ITMOs for it. So, and we are of course also convinced about that if it's properly thought through, Article 6 activities can support the NDC implementation and also in the longer perspective enhance the ambition or the ability for host countries also to raise their ambitions. So these countries must now address many complex issues and consider carefully questions such as which sectors are feasible for Article 6 activities, and what type of sector of activities would benefit the most from carbon finance, and how many tons of credits can or should we sell, and how will we safeguard environmental integrity? How will we share benefit with our within the community, and how can we leverage Article 6 to make even more ambitious change? So, and of course, practical issues has also to be solved, like who is responsible for managing the transaction domestically. So we're very happy to hear today the first experience from Ghana, Jordan, and Zambia. To what kind of approach they have already decided or they will take, and their perspective on implementing Article 6 and get involved into Article 6 transaction. So I would like to thank you, Carbon Limits and GGGI, for hosting this session, and I really look forward to learn about the experience and perspectives of these three pioneer countries in their journey towards Article 6 engagement. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Malin. That's a great overview of both kind of the opportunities and challenges countries face. So I think a very nice, also a very nice segue now into what Marshall Brown is going to present. Now, Marshall is the program that Malin mentioned, the SPARC program. So Marshall is actually the manager for that. And GGGI has been doing some very interesting work on needs assessment, identifying kind of where countries are at a global level. And then that'll give us then the transition from there. We'll go into a couple of points that I'll raise and then talking more to people from these three specific countries. So let me turn it over to Malin. Sorry, to Marshall to talk a bit more about Article 6 strategy needs. Thanks.
Great. Yes. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, fantastic. So yes, thank you, Malin, for that introduction, and Randall for moderating, and welcome everyone to the session. Today I'm going to talk about two things, a little briefly for both of them, but I think it will be a good introduction to our discussion. The first is about a survey that GGGI undertook earlier this year related to Article 6 readiness in our member and partner countries. And the second is a very brief overview of the SPARC program that Malin was just discussing in the opening remarks. So my name is Marshall Brown. I'm the Global Program Manager for the SPARC program, and calling in from Pakistan today as we're on an inception mission. So apologies if there's any issue with my internet. A little bit. Okay, so the first thing I wanted to talk about today is the global survey on Article 6 readiness. a report that we're just wrapping up now on this survey that was done in the middle of the year. We interviewed 77 individuals from 29 of our member and partner countries, which is almost all of them in the GGGI portfolio. And we asked them 26 different questions that were related to trying to gauge both their perceptions and the kind of more objective level of readiness that the countries are facing. And you can see in this map, there's quite a diverse set of countries across many different regions. So we think that it provides a little bit of a nice temperature check on the situation of Article 6 readiness globally. Some of the briefly, some of the findings, you know, the 93% of the countries that we interviewed have considered participating in Article 6, and the same number, the same amount, also believe that there are clear benefits that their country can receive under Article 6, whether that is, you know, the different development co-benefits or an opportunity to raise ambition. It is clear that there's an interest and for the supply side of the market to participate. One of the questions that we asked is, are there equal opportunities, or do you feel like there's an equal footing for buyers and sellers in the market? And this is an interesting question for GGGI because we, in many of our pilot programs, we have already learned that there is some hesitancy that is both linked to lower capacity and the lack of clarity in some of the rules, but also in the lack of experience in engaging with buyers. So there's some hesitancy on some sellers' part, despite the fact that they, or host countries, despite the fact that they see potential benefits and they're interested, they're still tiptoeing very slowly into the market. And that is one reason for maybe a slowed down readiness. At the same time, buyers are already reaching out to the countries. So 69% of countries that we surveyed have been approached, and the majority of those already discussed the idea of you know, undertaking a corresponding adjustment for any potential ITMO transfers. 41% were engaged in pilots already. And they were, but all of them were saying that they need additional assistance to engage with the buyers and that they're interested in undertaking potential pilots, whether they are already engaged or not. In terms of readiness, we asked, you know, what is the governance framework? What's the state of governance framework in your country in terms of both regulations to cover the national participation in international markets, whether that is an Article 6 strategy, which we're discussing today, or an overarching framework carbon pricing law. And you can see that the majority of countries are in the planning stage for developing an Article 6 strategy, with only one country, I believe, saying that they have a strategy in place. And 24%, interestingly, said that they have no plans in place to develop one. So I think it's important for us to discuss today why an Article 6 strategy is useful and how we can encourage potential host countries to really consider deeply all of the different issues that need to go into that strategy. Another thing that I'll just say is that we asked about what type of readiness or knowledge exchange, capacity building has been made available to our members and partners. 62% have had the opportunity to participate in some form of discussion or forum or knowledge exchange, but 100%, all of them said, yes, they need more opportunities. They need more capacity building in these top priority areas. And so I think today's session is a good example of what we intend to do in the Spark program in terms of knowledge exchange. Kind of building on that, so if you want to know more about the Article 6 survey that we did that will be available for public consumption relatively soon. But I wanted to also tell you a little bit about how the IKI-SPARK program that is funded by the Federal Ministry for Economic Affairs and Climate Action and led by GGGI is going to address some of those issues. So this is a 5-year, 20 million euro program that covers activities in 4 countries. There are 5 total partners in our consortium, so it's a lot of stakeholders involved in this project. It includes carbon limits, so Randall is leading on that end, as well as the UN Environment Program Copenhagen Climate Center, Communal Credit Public Consulting out of Austria, and GFA Consulting out of Germany. So altogether, we implement our program in Colombia, Pakistan, Thailand, and Zambia between now and 2027. As Malin was saying, the ultimate impact objective of this program is to open the markets and ensure that markets are functioning. And that includes by supporting the development of transactions and facilitation of transactions, but also helping countries understand how they can achieve a higher climate ambition by leveraging Article 6. Our program has a lot of activities going on. I think this diagram shows that. But yes, there are, in our countries that we're supporting, we're providing medium and long-term emission planning, support for governance frameworks, and also looking into mitigation activity development. The other thing that I will mention is that there are 2 supporting work packages along with our in-country support. So this is the Article 6 toolbox, which is being led by Carbon Limits and Randall and his team. And under this, we will develop a number of guides and handbooks and resources for countries who are at various stages of their Article 6 engagement journey. And then in the community of practice for Article 6 implementing countries is a global knowledge exchange forum, really, for countries who are interested in participation. So starting with Colombia, Pakistan, Thailand, and Zambia, but expanding to others as well as we engage more widely. And I think Jordan and Ghana will be some of those partners who we can learn from. So the COP ASIC, as we're calling it, will be launched on November 9th at COP27 in Egypt. So if you're there, hope that we can welcome you to that event and learn more about what we're doing in the program for that work package. So I'll leave it there. And thank you all. I hope, looking forward to a great conversation.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Marshall. So what I want to continue with before we go to our panelists is just to give a little overview of what do we actually mean when we talk about Article 6 strategy? What does it mean for a country to have an Article 6 strategy? And what I would suggest is that there are kind of 4 main elements. And in fact, Malin actually did a good job of touching on these. So I would say that 4 areas are, number 1, how to manage overselling risk. And I'm going to go into these in a bit more detail. Number 2, setting up all the institutional arrangements and procedures that are needed to meet the requirements for Article 6. Then number 3, there's some additional kind of basic prerequisites that are required in the rules. So you've got to get that out of the way. And then fourthly, and this was touched on by Marshall, how do you formalize all this? So do you have some type of policy, strategy, regulation, document, or process that really codifies this? And then hopefully, as we talk to the people in the countries, they can reflect a little bit on where they are in these particular areas. So I mean, I think people all know, and even Marshall mentioned this, there's been some hesitancy from countries because they realize it's not like the CDM where everything that you transfer is almost by definition bringing benefit to you. Here there are some trade-offs. So countries need to think about, are there strategies they can use to engage strongly in Article 6, but still set some type of qualitative or quantitative limits, or kind of link their baselines for crediting to their NDC to make sure it's beyond the NDC action, etc. So that's a key area. And I should say, I think this is a manageable risk, right? I know some people are concerned that there's so much worry over overselling that no one is going to trade at all. I think this is a very, very manageable risk, but it's something to be aware of. In terms of institutional arrangements, again, yes, there are some requirements, but we can build on a lot. Almost all countries have CDM designated national authorities. They often have institutional arrangements for their NDC. They may have a GCF contact point. So there's plenty of institutional, I think, infrastructure to build on. What we need to add to that, obviously, is the specific criteria and procedures for this new term, authorization of mitigation outcomes, as well as how you transfer and report your activity in Article 6. And then when I say, talk about these additional prerequisites, there are a number of things in the Article 6.2 guidance, for example, that countries to participate, they have to have a current NDC and a current inventory. They need to do some work quantifying their NDCs, which that might be a bit of a challenge. If they have a single year target, they have to explain how they'll address that. They need to explain how they'll deal with transactions and registries, etc. So there's a few things. Again, yes, some of it's new, but most of it, I think countries are thinking about in any case and doable. And then once you get through these, I think what supports that is how do you codify all of that? So how do you make sure then, for example, the actors who are going to be in charge of authorizing mitigation outcomes, that they have the necessary authority to do that? So there's something about kind of codifying this in some form of regulation. And the way that happens, I think, will probably be very different from country to country, because countries have different regulatory and legislative systems, for example. There's a component here also about communication. I've kind of put it under here just because 1, 2, and 3 are primarily activities within government. And yet at the end of the day, we need people outside of government to also be really making this happen. And that's why when we come to our second panel, we want to hear a little bit from people outside of government on those perspectives. So that's actually all I was going to say about elements of an Article 6 strategy. Now what I would like to do is introduce our first panel. So as I mentioned, we wanted to hear from people who are working with this on a day-to-day basis. And we're fortunate to have 3 different countries represented in this. And the way I'm going to do this is, in a moment, once I say who we have here, I'm going to stop sharing slides. I will ask a question, and then I'll ask all 3 participants if they can respond to that. And we'll have 2 or 3 rounds of questions that way, because I want each of our participants to be able to share with us and respond on these points. And so who do we have with us today? We have Engineer Bilal Shukran from Jordan, who is very actively engaged in Article 6 strategy at the Ministry of Environment. We have Daniel Tutu Benefo, who is from the Ghana EPA, also very engaged in this field. I should have said Engineer Bilal is the Director of Climate Change in the ministry, whereas Daniel Benefo is the Director of the Climate Change Unit in the Ghana EPA. And then we have Aurelius Nkonde, who's the Principal Climate Change Officer for Mitigation in Zambia's Ministry of Green Economy and Environment. So let me do this. I'm going to stop sharing, and I'll ask our speakers if they can turn their videos on so we can see them. Thank you so much. And then I'm going to now pose the first question, which I think was hopefully a fairly easy one. And it's just really, where is your country currently in the process of creating some type of Article 6 strategy? And maybe if you can say, Marshall talked about the different types of support that may be available for countries. So I'd be very interested to hear in where you are right now and what kind of external support has been most helpful so far in that strategy process. And maybe I'll just go in the order I introduce people and ask Engineer Bilal to first speak for a moment about that. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Randall, and thanks, Yanni, for the GGGI for giving us such opportunity. The matter within Article 6 is a huge matter that will tackle climate change during the upcoming 20 years. and its rationale is a very respected rationale. We are always, even when we are talking about the nature itself and talking about ecosystems, we always talk about the upstream and downstream dilemma. So all of the globe has to reduce emissions in a certain amount. If it wasn't at your place itself, at least you have to buy it from other places and buy that price for that upstream, so that all we collaborate in the emission reduction scheme and keeping the temperature below 1.5 according to Paris Agreement. So yes, we are looking for to enhance the methodologies, to enhance the tools and the mechanisms to open carbon market in the country. This is something. Talking about what happened in Jordan. Jordan, we've created the MRV system, monitoring, reporting, and verification system, so that we can have the database of all of the reduction projects in the country in a way that we have the data. Once we have the correct and accurate data, we can look from that side what should we use in our NDC's commitment to fulfill it, and what could be used to be marketed, and which market it has to be. So all of those needs comprehensive data collection, comprehensive registry for all. At the same time, in assisting system to the MRV, we've had the greenhouse gas registry system in order to be compatible within the MRV itself. What I would like to say is that we are in the path. Hopefully soon we're gonna open the market and have at least in the first quarter or the first half of the upcoming year, we're gonna produce a draft framework, some kind of legislative framework that could regulate and enhance the engagement within the market, whether it was a national ETS, emission trading system, or whether it was regional, or talking about the other global carbon markets in its two kinds, whether it was voluntary or for the compliance markets. We've been so happy during the previous COP 26 that we've ended up with a draft. This draft to be regulated, approved, and go to the implementation within this COP, the COP 27. Hopefully that it will be, and we are gonna begin the mechanism within developing a good and transparent market for the carbon credits worldwide. As been said by reputable Randall and Marshall, and also our colleagues, the countries hesitating because sometimes there is a miss within the clarity of the Article 6, of the implementation of that Article 6, the missing parts between and the differentiation between voluntary markets and the compliance market. It's a huge difference between both. So replying the second question, which was raised by Randall, that what Jordan is looking for in order to enhance and go further on within the Article 6 workflow. Well, the matter is that each country, in order to have the good usage of Article 6, has to make its breakdown of the country's NDCs and the global commitment within that NDCs into the sectoral pathways and to draw to each sector in the country a pathway which can show some commitment and compliance for the NDCs within their reduction, and some to produce ITMOS and produce the credentials that could be sold later. This is something, and within that sector, even each project or action at that sector has to have, let's say, a private entity who has working in mining, working in whatever, in transport and whatever. Even that particular project has to have that plan, and that long-term plan which says this is to comply within the sector's NDCs and amount of reduction that needed by the government, and this is to be registered as ITMOSs that could be sold whenever the price is compatible within the needs of that. So the pathways is along it is a long development issue which needs lots of support from different entities, from different sides, from raising the transformation of technical assessments and capacities for it. And within that, we are looking to be engaged within the GGGI, hand by hand within the already MDPs that we are engaged with, in order to fulfill our plans for preparing a good, enhanced, transparent market, liberal for even the private sector to know what should be sold, what shouldn't, and to have a financial, each entity could have a financial pathway plan, knowing that in this year I'm gonna sell this amount of ITMOSs, and in the next year of it I'm gonna be complying to some NDCs. So everything has to be clear for each, breaking down the country's commitment into the individual's commitment, working all together for that path. I hope that I've replied you, Randall. Over to you, unless there's any extra I have to add it here.
Well, that's great. Thank you very much. I think that's a great start. And maybe then I'll pass the microphone over to Daniel to give us a bit about Ghana's perspective of where you are and what you found most helpful so far.
All right. Thank you very much, Randall. Nice seeing you again, and good afternoon to everybody. Randall, we had begun this work since 2019, and we have covered about 5 broad areas. And I think those areas, the previous speakers already mentioned them briefly. The first one is the policy side, the clear policy linkage between the NDCs and the long-term plan of the country and the role of Article 6, both the 6.4 and the 6.8. And as a result, we have communicated in the NDCs the amount of tons of carbon credits that we intend to transact or engage in the 6.2. So we have a clear policy on that. We also in the NDC had clearly linked the projects that are eligible for transactions in the NDCs based on the conditional and the unconditional NDCs. So we have clearly indicated that, and even those outside the NDCs. So in terms of how to avoid overselling or overcrediting, we have clearly indicates where we are willing to authorize in the NDCs and even outside the NDCs, and which sectors are eligible. So we have covered that on the policy side. Then we had also spent some time to initiate and negotiate and conclude on the creation of and authorizing cooperative approaches. So we've spent about 3 years so far to engage with 3 countries, and we have engaged with the first generation. The first one was with the Swiss government, which we negotiated for about 8 to 1 year to conclude on our first bilateral cooperative approach, which was done sometime in November 2020. We have since then been engaged with the government of Sweden and the government of Singapore. We are at the very tail end of concluding the negotiations of the elements in the creation of a new cooperative approach, and we are at the point of signing the 2 concluded draft agreements. The experience there is that we want to sign it in the COP, hopefully, but the experience there I wanted to highlight is that the process of creating cooperative approach is a long but very important whole government approach. It requires those who are involved in the negotiations to reach out to others in different ministries, and bring them together to have a national team to engage in the creation of that, and that takes some time. The other part is also that it is also important to aim at creating a standardized cooperative approach such that the standards are across board. Because to us, we think that there must be a cooperative approach for which there should be an authorization. And therefore, in creating these multiple cooperative approaches, there must be some form of standardization across board, across different actors, and on that basis, that will influence the authorization process. And therefore, that is a very important point that I want to highlight, that in creating these cooperative approaches, there must be some effort to achieve some minimum standard across board, but it takes effort. And then the other one is also that it requires a high-level political endorsement. In the case of Ghana, when you finish with the negotiations, you have to seek a formal legal review of the documents. The document must go to the cabinet, it must be signed, then it ought to be ratified. So it takes some bit of time to create that. So that is the state of the work on the creation of cooperative approaches. Then the other one is the work on the national framework. Because to us, we think that the cooperative approach is like a broader framework between the 2 countries or multiple countries, but our national framework kind of stipulates the policies and the regulatory requirements that is supposed to guide the development of projects. So again, it took us almost 12 months to come up with a draft of the national framework. And the national framework, again, contains about 5 main elements that I think Randall almost mentioned. It contains eligibility criteria. It contains the procedures for authorization. It contains the approaches for avoiding overselling. It contains the procedures for ensuring safeguard and high environmental integrity. It contains the process of issuance and tracking of ITMOs and use. So we've covered quite a broad range of the principles as contained in 6.4 and 6.2. And then it also contains the national institutional arrangements. In the case of Ghana, we want to use the same institutional arrangement as Randall said. From the CDM, we want to expand the scope of it and make sure that the same structures are used for the requirement under 6.2 and 6.4. So that is what we have attempted to. And then we have a 3-tier structure: the political structure, the technical structure, and also the functional office that we have put in place. The functional structure is where the approvals and the rule-making processes will take place, and it's made up of both government and private sector. There is also an office that has been set up to support the delivery of the mandates of the functional and political structure. The last point I want to highlight is also about development of projects. We are also already involved in helping private sector to kickstart the pipeline. So far, we have already 10 projects that are in the pipeline that are at different stages of development. And we hope that this project pipeline would be faster enough to be able to issue authorized ITMOs or any form of credits. The last one I want to highlight is also on our work on registries, right? So we have established an Article 6 office which is going to manage the Ghana Carbon Registry over time. The beta version of that registry is up and is being tested as we speak. I think I've had enough of the time. Over to you, Randall.
Great, thanks. So that was really, really helpful, both the kind of overview and also some of those details. So then let me go to Aurelius for some perspective from Zambia. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's quite interesting to see that there's quite some significant progress that our colleagues have made. Well, we are also have made quite a bit of some progress as a country. I must state from the onset that we do have quite some very good political support and will towards the participating in Article 6 transactions and projects, ultimately just establishing a robust and well-functioning carbon market a platform. In terms of what exists so far in our country, we do have a DNA that was established for purposes of issuing authorization for CDM projects. And as a country, we have decided that this same institutional framework or arrangement that was existing, of course, with enhancements and further capacity building and further strengthening, would continue in terms of Article 6 transaction. So we do have the institutional framework that is already existing in terms of authorizing Article 6 transactions. Of course, we also have, in terms of having our policy frameworks in place, we have had the National Policy on Climate Change. That also speaks to aspects of carbon markets in general. This National Policy on Climate Change is currently just going under review to incorporate aspects of the green economy as well as aspects of carbon markets with respect to what has come on board in terms of Article 6 transactions. One of the key pieces of policy frameworks
I think we had a connection problem. Sorry, Aurelius, we lost you for just about 15 seconds.
Yeah, sorry, thank you. I was saying that we do have in process a climate change bill that has been drafted that has provisions that speak to the carbon markets and how we are going to go about regulating this market, as well as ensuring that we have a legal framework that governs our transactions in Article 6 transactions. So this legal framework is quite advanced, and it's almost going through some other further legal processes that need to have it cleared by Parliament. But of course, we've done our part in terms of technical additions, technical provisions have been put in place. What we now need is an aspect of it now going through the clear legal frameworks or legal processes that needs to clear this bill. So from the policy side and also the legislative side, those are the key provisions that we have. I must make mention that also we are in the process of developing our green growth strategy, and Article 6 transactions is one of the areas that we have ensured that we incorporate and put in our green growth strategy. We do have, I know that GGGI is one of those partners that are supporting us in this area to just come up with a robust green growth strategy for the country. We do also have, from the strategy point of view, an updated NDC that has incorporated also from the onset. We indicated to say, as a country, we are going to participate some of the projects that are sorry.
We heard that you'd updated your NDC and that it already specified a clear role for Article 6.
Yes. We do even have some of the mitigation strategies, or rather mitigation projects that are already suggested in that NDC. For example, in 2019, we were negotiating with the German government on an Article 6 project on the technical losses or things to do with reactive power compensation. So this is one of the projects that we are already looking at as a country, and we've already shown interest in participating in these Article 6 transactions. I must make mention also that we already have started negotiations with the German government, which also culminated into us participating in the Spark 6 program as one of the African countries that are participating in this Article 6 kind of a project. And we are very excited as a country to ensure that we are ready to transact and also participate in the Article 6 transactions themselves. One of the other important readiness strategies or readiness activities we've done as a country is to have or set up an integrated MRV system, which also looks at, it considers aspects of climate financing, it considers aspects of greenhouse gas inventory and emissions. Then it also has a component that looks at mitigation actions. It has components that look at adaptation actions, and it has also components that look at technology transfer and capacity building. So this integrated system is a system that we've just about to launch, and we know that this is one of the key pieces that will be quite critical as we enter into these transactions. Also, we are in the process of submitting our letter of intent to indicate as a country, as a requirement, of course, based on the advice that we got from the supervisory body of the Article 6, that as a country we need to submit our letter of intent to participate in Article 6 transactions. So this is one of the things that is in the process of being submitted to the UNFCCC, to indicate that Zambia is actually one of the countries that is, interested to participate in Article 6 transactions. We did have a scoping mission that came for the Article 6 project, and from that, interaction we had, we did engage quite a number of stakeholders from banks, private sector, civil society organizations. We did have engagements with line ministries that are going to have interest in this Article 6 transactions. And I must say that from the stakeholders in the country, we do have quite some significant interest to participate in this process, both from the private sector, financial institutions, as well as even research institutions and other line ministries. In terms of where we started from, I must make mention that from the time we started, engaging this aspect, in 2019, we did have COVID, and it slowed some of the processes that we wanted to ensure that we have kickoff even by now. Our key priorities in terms of Article 6 transactions is to have a clear readiness, a clear national registry that puts all these things together and have a tracking method of how we can track some of these activities that are already taking place. I must make mention that we do have players that have already engaged in, especially from the CDM mechanism, that are already participating in this space from the voluntary carbon markets. We do have quite a number of applications that are coming through, a lot of pressure, trying to ask the government to issue ITMOS authorization of some sort. But as a government, we've had the challenge to go ahead and issue out authorization, simply because we do not have clear guidelines as a country. And this is one of the things that we really need as soon as possible to have some framework or guidelines. Like I heard from Ghana, they do have quite a number of pieces of documents that have been put in place. So as a country, we do need clear guidelines that we want to use as a country to ensure that we are able to also authorize ITMOS transactions. So this is what the SPAC 6 program should be able to help us with as we embark on this program going forward. I think those are the few things that I wanted to bring out. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. I think these three interventions were excellent. I think they gave a really strong sense of both the range of areas that are being covered. I think there's a lot of consistency, things like policy, criteria, procedures, links to the MRV frameworks and registries, so the detailed analysis behind it, etc. And almost everyone also brought up the idea of how do we develop a pipeline, how do we work with people outside of government? So that's what I'd like to turn to now. So we have three people from the same countries who are working in this space. And I'd like to introduce Ruba Ajour, who's the manager of the Climate Change Studies Division at the Royal Scientific Society of Jordan. We also have Ismail Ejukumhene, who's the executive director of the Kumasi Institute of Technology, Energy, and Environment in Ghana, and Professor Francis Yamba, who's the director of the Center for Energy, Environment, and Engineering, Zambia. And so I'll do the same thing. I think I'll pose a question, and I'll ask if each of the three of you in turn can respond to this. And I guess I'm going to modify my question a little bit. What I hear from all three government speakers is that there's definitely interest, right? That they're already being approached. And in fact, Aurelius was saying there's a little bit of a pressure of people saying, please give us a letter of authorization. Maybe the way I would put it is all three of you have been very active in the CDM world, right? So you know the history. What do we need to be doing differently, or what do you think is really important now about how government engages with, and maybe not just the private sector, but the project development sector, let's go, because it could be NGOs that develop projects, right? So what specifically do you think your governments can do to engage with this project development community to make sure we don't just have nice strategies in place, but we actually have actions as well? And maybe I'll let Ruba lead off with that.
I'm very happy to be with you all. First, I'd like to introduce myself. As Randall said, I'm Ruba. I'm from RSS. RSS is like a research institution. We like to call ourselves a NGO. So we are partly a consultation company, and we are partly private sector. We have a combination of all. So as you said, Randall, companies are posing pressure on the governments to have the Article 6 activated, because maybe private sector a new business opportunity for them. So you asked what was that made the CDM maybe less than what it should have been for Jordan. I guess maybe the process or the framework that we had in place was so lengthy. It needs so much work, so much technical knowledge, and that was not so much clear in many aspects in Jordan. So maybe to have a better Article 6 involvement, we need simpler, maybe framework, simpler legislative framework. We need to have a straightforward policy, strategy, law, enforcement law. So we need to know where we can be involved and how is our involvement as private sector. These things have to be clarified, and the steps needs to be also clarified. Maybe as we once said, and we once discussed with the Minister of Environment, that we need a platform with simple steps. How can we register? How can we provide our services in terms of designing the project, in terms of implementing the projects, and then verifying its outcomes. So maybe we need more clarity, more straightforward steps to be involved in Article 6. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Very helpful. So then let me then turn to Ishmael to give us your perspective on how do we get more engagement.
Good afternoon, Randall, and sorry, thank you everyone for having me here. It's interesting. I don't know where to tackle this question from, but for me, listening to Daniel, most of the time when you listen to what our political actors are trying to do, you see how well-intentioned they are and how they want to, and learning from our CDM experience, you see how they're trying to build up on the CDM and even make things better. But clearly for the private sector, there has to be something extra. And for me, I think one of the major problems that prevented us from doing a lot of CDM projects is funding. And I'm not talking about grants, I'm talking about affordable financing. That makes sense to the private sector to be able to say that, having developed my project pipeline, where do I take the project to? I mean, we all know how the carbon funding, it's only going to contribute a small fraction to the entire project cost. And even that is not going to come in until we've actually executed the project. The problem we have here is cost of borrowing is so high, to the extent that even so-called green credit lines are not affordable because they can lend beyond what they call the base rates. Okay, so the SunRef is still, for example, in Ghana, is still struggling to disburse. Not that they don't have people who are interested, but I mean, it used to be 20-something%, now it's worse. So for me, it's how to make funding available and affordable, not grants, but project financing. That makes a lot of sense. Let me give you a very typical example. Under CDM, we were doing a $2 million project with a private company. And under the EU facility, we managed to even get 43% of that project funds as a grant component. This private company needed to find the remaining 57%. They couldn't raise that money. Okay, so eventually, after 1 year of trying and postponing the timelines, we had to send the 43% back to the EU. So that nice waste-to-energy project that would have brought in a lot of savings and all of that had to be stalled. They said they were going to do it all at their own pace. So for me, in Ghana, and I'm happy to hear Daniel talk about all the pipelines, I'm hoping that we'll be able to move those projects through the pipeline very quickly. And one of the things that we're all going to be facing pretty soon is cost of capital and how they can implement those projects. So I think the engagement needs to address some of the bigger macroeconomic issues that if we don't address that, then we'll have a lot of people having hopes and aspirations. And like CDM is not for want of trying. A lot of private sector actors attempted to do CDM projects. But once the potential contribution from carbon financing is assessed and estimated, you realize that you need a much bigger money to be able to even bring the project to the point where you can even start claiming some of these CRs. So I think that's something that needs to change. Otherwise, Daniel and his team, all the fantastic work that they're doing, you realize I wouldn't have too many projects rolling out. I mean, what we have going for us is when you have big public utilities also interested in having some of these projects, because if that happens, then they have some other leverage that they can even use and get some grants, some loan facility concessionary credits to be able to roll out some of this project. But the pure private sector man who came to me a couple of weeks ago saying that, look, can you get SunRep to at least guarantee me 18%? And I have some projects, 18%, he couldn't get the 18%. So that's what I would say for now.
Okay, thank you. No, very, very important. So let me turn it now to Professor Yambo, who I think the video might have had some difficulty. We were just seeing the clouds there, so I'm not sure how that will work.
Yes. So the problems with my video, so I'll just speak without my video.
That's fine.
People like Ishmael know me. I haven't seen Ishmael for a long time. Hello, Ishmael.
Yes, Prof. I'm doing well, Prof. I was so pleasantly surprised when I saw your name. It's been a while.
Yes.
I should say that Professor Yambo is kind of all of our mentors, so it's lovely to have him here.
Yes. To answer the first question from Randall, how the private sector has expressed interest in engaging SC in Article 6 projects in Zambia. I think I can consider this at two levels and say interest has been significant in Zambia. First of all, in the first instance, since 2018, 2019, we've been developing an SC Article 6 pilot project, which address technical losses in the transmission and distribution systems of Zambia's energy system, ZESCO. And fortunately, this was funded by BMU, by the then BMU. And then it concentrated. Yes, it attracted a lot of stakeholders. ZESCO was interested. ZESCO really cooperated with us, gave us the list of data for 8,000 MD customers they have. We worked through the methodology to calculate the emission reduction from these 8,000 customers, and then we now implementing the project. The financing structure was formulated, and now we are identifying about 5-6 firm companies whom we can work with this project. So far, it's interesting, and then the 5 companies have been identified, and we think it's going to work. Financing structure is already in place, just a matter of getting the customers. Yes, on the second level of involving the private sector in Article 6, the government recently launched the Spark 6 program, which Aurelia has talked about, which aims to develop 3 to 5 opportunities. At the launch, there were very many stakeholders we invited from the private sector. They included, as Aurelia said, the Bank of Zambia, the financial institutions, the private sector, consulting firms. So all those got interested in the projects. They went further to discuss the various projects which they can get involved in. These companies, ZESCO and CO, at the projects, they formulated some projects which can be developed and implemented. Also, some carbon project proponents in the energy efficient cook stoves also came out with so many projects. So really, we have a good portfolio of projects which we can, through the Spark project, be able to develop and have a portfolio of carbon projects. I'd like to stop here for this question. Thank you very much. Yes, just to add one more.
Yes, please, go ahead.
This preparedness, I think a country like Zambia will do better than we did at the CDM. Under CDM, we did at least 3 or 4 projects, and that was enough. We think we can work actively under this SPARK project and develop more projects, and which we shall be able to sell the IITMOs. Thank you very much, Randall.
Thank you. I think what I'm going to do, I'm going to ask one more quick question for this to have around. In the meanwhile, I'll ask if people from the audience have questions to begin to put those in the chat, and then we'll have time, you feel free to ask questions to any of the panelists from both panels. So get prepared for that. So I would ask, and I meant to ask this question to the government folks, and maybe we'll come back to them as well. It's kind of like, from your experience so far, I mean, a key component of this whole week, and also of the SPARK program, is about learning from each other, right? So I'm curious, what advice would you give to other countries and people in other countries who may be on this in this seminar? What advice would you give to them about either how to encourage the governments to really reach out and engage the project development community, or maybe advice to those actors? They're saying, what should I do? I'm in another country. Can you give me some advice on where I should start, at least, if I'm interested in engaging? And maybe we'll just take it in the same order. Well, actually, no. Actually, you feel free to just jump in. Maybe whoever wants to respond to that is fine also.
I was disconnected for a minute, so I just heard that you asked what kind of advice we can give other countries launching their development in Article 6. So from my point of view is that we need the involvement of the private sector at the very early beginnings, so that we could know what we can do to help or to drive the whole process around. So if we are involved, if we have a clear strategy in place, we can choose where we can mingle, where we can be involved, how we can support the government. From my perspective, the private sector can take more than one role. They can develop the project. They can be a consultation company who would verify the project, who can make consultation for the government on specific technical issues. So the involvement of private sector can be on more than one phase, in more than one step of the whole process. So, so the government launching this strategy, we need to be aware of what they are thinking about, how they want our involvement, our support as private sector. So maybe this can help if we are involved from the very beginning of within this process. And I consider myself involved and fortunate because I'm involved since the early beginning in this process. So I have a preset eye on this process.
Great, thank you. Thank you. Ishmael, do you want to comment there? Advice for the for other folks?
Yeah, just to say that we have CDM to learn from. We shouldn't make the process any more cumbersome than the CDM was. But I think Daniel has offered us some very good lessons that we need to, for the other countries to think through it. You can't circumvent the process. Make sure that you've started your conversation and all the engagements early enough, and make sure you have your frameworks in place, your strategy, everything in place, because there has to be some rules, right? There has to be some rules, and it has to be made clear to the private sector. And then as much as possible, try to, make the private sector aware of all the incentives in there, what they stand to gain, and then make sure that they begin to realize those potential benefits that would make them interested, because let's face it, without them, most of these projects are going to remain on the drawing board. So those of us who are yet to start our frameworks, let's make sure that we don't make it too cumbersome, but make sure also that you bring the private sector on board quite early and let them tell you what their frustrations are, so that you work with all of that in mind in designing the frameworks. That will be my take on this one.
Thank you. Professor Yamba, do you want to respond? And then I
Yes,
think maybe Engineer Bilal might want to say something as well.
Yes, to add what Ruba and Ishmael have just said, I think they are right. It's most important is the development of a clear and reliable SC framework, which we can develop under the SPARK project, so that we can give clarity to the private sector, but also clarify for carbon buyers what type of carbon credits are available. I think that's what I can say on this point. My colleagues have already elaborated on the point very, very eloquently. Thank you.
Great. I'm wondering whether I see Engineer Bilal has his video on. Yeah, if any of the government folks would also like to say something about what advice would you give to other countries who were maybe much earlier on in this process, based on your experience. Do you want to respond, Engineer Bilal?
Thank you, Randall, Yani, for that. Well, the matter is that, Yani, thank Yani, all of the panelists, Yani, for what's been said. And about private sector, we are always saying it in all of our sessions. Private sector has to lead and pave the way for climate response projects. The matter, sir, here is with Article 6 is that we have to integrate economical instrument within our climate change policy to achieve it. There should be some of the incentives and some of penalties, or let's say taxation regime, but in a way or another, it has to break down the we've break already down the global commitment to Paris Agreement, the global reduction commitment, into a country reduction commitment. The same, it has to be break down into sectors and into each project. And within that, they have a cap. Whenever that they are compliance within their cap, they should be freely planning to register ITMOS, register whatever they want to register, and sell it freely to incentivize and support their pathway within carbon reduction issues. But prior doing this whole cycle, it will stay a little bit messy where to have the selling options, which has to have also the interference of the global and the UNFCCC and the global forum, showing really the real usage of each market and show it in a simple, clear way for countries. Nothing is like the CDM. CDM was prior Paris Agreement, which was the phase that developing countries had no cap to talk about. Whatever was to be reduced at developing country could be sold. So after Paris Agreement, and changing the intended national determined contribution into a national determined contribution, it became as a commitment that must be fulfilled for each of us. The same, each player and each individual in the country has a commitment to do it to the country itself. Whatever could be made above that, it could be sold as an incentive to this person or to that company to be used in their pathway within climate or let's say emission neutrality. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just wondering whether Daniel or Aurelius would like to add any thoughts or advice to other countries that are starting their journey on Article 6 strategies. Do either of you want to add something? I think they're still with us. Okay, well, if you do, you're welcome to jump in at a later stage. Right now, I think the only question we've had from the audience so far Earlier, there was a question for Ghana, so I'm hoping Daniel can address this about, in terms of Ghana's experience, what was the process of defining the project pipeline and what sectors were covered? I wonder if that's something that Daniel could perhaps address briefly. And if others have questions, also, if you know what I just realized though, I'm looking at the participants. I believe Daniel had to drop off. I mean, Ishmael, are you familiar with that process of the pipeline development? Could you say something about it?
Not so much the pipeline, but regarding how we ended up prioritizing the NDCs. So there was a long list of projects. I think there were about 55 of them that got pruned down to what we had in the initial NDCs. And but in terms of what they are using in the pipeline, I don't have much information, and it's a shame that Daniel is not. I'll see if I can get him before we end the session.
Sure, sure. I mean, what's interesting about that question, and I think it reflects what Engineer Bilal was talking about, that there's some of the early, like if you go back to the INDCs, many of them were very big. They literally just had a national emission reduction goal. That was it. And then the kind of next generation, they might have some sectors, whereas now a lot of the updated NDCs from many countries have very detailed lists of activities and specifying, are they leading us to our unconditional, conditional? And that, I think, you know, something like that has to happen as part of the process, because I think all of you said that the project developers need clarity, right? They can't spend 6 months and thousands of dollars trying to develop an idea only to find out, oh no, sorry, but this isn't allowed in our country. So there has to be that clarity. And the only way to get that clarity is this additional work on the NDC itself. Like Engineer Bilal was saying, you have to think through which sectors, which subsectors or actors are potentially going to be involved, and what do we want to use for Article 6 versus others. Again, not to say you can't get started with pilots because that's, I mean, always the balance here, right? It doesn't mean you need to wait 3 or 4 years before doing any pilot activities, but it just means that there's a big payback, I think, for countries for spending the time and the energy with support of their development partners to understand in more detail what will it take for us to reach our own NDC goals, and therefore what are some of the opportunities where we could engage with other countries in Article 6. We also had a question, this is quite a general question, about how compliance with the NDC is guaranteed while using Article 6. Would anybody like to talk about your perspectives on what's the relationship between this Article 6 engagement and making sure that countries still reach their NDC? Anybody like to jump in there? I know, Engineer Bilal, I know that Jordan is thinking a little bit about this, right, in terms of making sure there's still NDC compliance, even as you develop your pipeline. Is there anything you could say about that?
Well, sir, yes, we are in our path, to do so. And as for carbon limit, you've worked with also some of the MDPs, especially World Bank, that we are working with, in order to have hopefully by the mid of the upcoming year a framework which shows clarity within the Article 6 issues, and also to make use of it as a country, and to make use of it for individuals in order to enhance the movement within the carbon reduction issues.
Thank you. Aurelius, did you want to respond? I saw your camera go on momentarily. I just wanted to make sure. Did you want to say something as well?
Yes, I wanted to just bring out one point. I'll pick it up from. I know Ishmael indicated that we need to learn from the CDM, projects and all. I'll give a perspective of the challenges that we've faced as Zambia, really. Well, there are a number of CDM perhaps there are some CDM projects that were registered, and then but then there's been this lack of tracking progress on those projects that have been there, and hence the need to have a very robust and coherent system that monitors progress on these projects. We have had a number of applications that have come in so far of projects that we thought they are on the register, perhaps they've gone and they never existed, but then because of ITMOS transactions and Article 6, they've again popped up. So we don't want a situation that creates some sort of mistrust between government and also project developers, in the sense that you feel as government, then you begin to feel that you've been shortchanged. So as we begin to ensure that these activities contribute significantly towards our NDCs, either through raising ambition and making that significant contribution through those corresponding adjustments and the like. So it's quite important that these, despite them being voluntary from the voluntary carbon markets or from the compliance markets, at least there is some level of involvement from the government side. So for me, this is what the Article 6 brings to the table, in the sense that it gets to have some sort of level of involvement, both in the voluntary markets as well as the carbon markets from the government side. For us, it helps to monitor progress, both from the voluntary carbon market projects as well as those compliance market kinds of projects. So I feel that it's quite important that we do have systems that are solidified, systems that are enhanced, a lot of capacity building, to be done towards the monitoring, towards ensuring that the systems of progress monitoring, result-based monitoring is clearly outlined and followed. So I feel it creates both investor confidence, it creates also confidence from the government side, and all stakeholders that are involved in this process get to be sure and comfortable. Thank you.
Thank you. No, that's very helpful. And of course, because suddenly governments are being kind of thrown in the deep end with the voluntary carbon market, right? Most governments haven't had any engagement there. That is an added challenge, and you're right. There's a lot to kind of track and manage in a much greater role for government. I think for our last question, I think Marc-Andre Maurer sent us a very useful question, which actually fits well with the overall theme here, which is really about how do you think countries can share or exchange, or what's most effective? Because obviously there are individual countries that are making a lot of progress on their Article 6 strategies and frameworks. What do you think would be the best way to have exchange, or what kind of platforms or forum might be helpful to make sure that we disseminate that experience and that knowledge? And just feel free to any of the speakers to raise your hand and jump in there if you'd like to say something.
So Randall Ishmael here.
Yes, sure.
So I think the community of practice that is being considered under the SPAC, for example, could be a replicable model. And in those areas where knowledge sharing is such a top priority, I don't think we need to be reinventing the wheel. So I guess depending on how the community of practice goes with the SPAC, I think it could be replicated. But also, I think countries that are starting should feel free to do this one-on-one bilateral engagement and consultations. Many of them are going to be in COP anyway. So if I were to be in their shoes, I'll be shopping around to see who is where and be able to learn what others are doing. So that would be my suggestion, but definitely something like the community of practice that SPAC is considering is something that could be looked at carefully and see if there's any existing arrangement like that, it could link the two platforms and ultimately becomes a global platform that everybody can go in there and learn. Thank you.
I guess producing fact sheets would be a very good idea for best practices, short and concise, and it can be published on public platforms.
Yes, I think
Thank
I'd like
you.
to add what the
please.
colleagues have said. I think it's very good to have exchange like we used to have in the past. Personal contacts through workshops and so on. We learned a lot. Like Ghana has done a lot in some aspects. Zambia has done a lot in some aspects. So if they met frequently, they'll be able to learn from each other and then enhance the road to completeness of the NDCs. Thank you.
Mala, did you want to add something as well? I saw your video on.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, if I may, I would like to share some experience from our perspective looking into the implementing countries. And I would say that it's also important. Of course, we are very happy that we will be able to launch the community of practice in at COP in Sharm el-Sheikh. And I think also that this is an important, or we hope that this will be an important forum for exchange, definitely. But at the same time, I would also like to highlight that according to our experience, it seems like that it's also important for countries to have an regional exchange. So we have different alliances, West African and East African alliances, but also we recognize further interest in other regions. And I think that both is important. At the one hand, of course, also to have the global exchange. For instance, what's happening in Colombia, and can we transfer this into an African country, for instance? But at the same time, I think it's also more to have a more smaller exchange for like an alliance or a regional approach is also important to, yeah, I think there is a possibility to further develop other ideas in such an format. That's my point of view, how to say, but of course it's always the choice of the implementing countries that are really using the different forums. So yeah, I just wanted to add this. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Just for Engineer Bilal, did you want to share something as well before we wrap up?
Thank you so much. Well, the same. We are looking for to have a panel or to have a dashboard for carbon markets, wherever, whatever, if it was compliance or if it was even voluntary markets, so that we do not need to reinvent the wheel in each country. We are all in this path and we need to learn from each other. I assume that the differentiations between a country to another would be slightly, a very slight differences, for its methodologies and its regulation. So we would like all to learn and exchange experience from each other, and each country will know where's the benefit and where's the mistakes that shouldn't do that. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So that brings us to our time. This has been really, really useful, and I'm just really very grateful to all of the speakers, to Malin and Marshall for helping us set the stage, and for the country representatives. I think it's been much. I said to Marshall at the very beginning of planning this, I don't want this to be a 45-minute PowerPoint presentation. Much more interesting to hear from people who are actually doing this, and we definitely have turned out that way. So just wanted to express my gratitude on behalf of the organizers. And Marshall, do you or Malin want to say anything in closing?
Not from my side, just thank you, Randall, for really great moderation and everyone for your participation. We have 60 plus attendees online, some really good questions and participation. So thank you, everyone.
Yes, I just would like to add, I hope to see you at our launch event in Sharm el-Sheikh, and thank you very much for this interesting discussion here today, and thank you, Randall, for moderating this session. Thank you.
You're welcome. And just for everyone's benefit, so Marshall did put in the chat where this community of practice will be launched on the 9th of November. So perhaps we'll see some of you there. Some of the team will. All right. Thank you and enjoy the rest of Global Green Growth Week.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Thank you very much.